Hey everybody, what is going on? This is Scott Garber, back in the saddle of the Profluence podcast, where we are highlighting founders, investors, executives across the sports business landscape. And today we're excited to welcome our next guest, Greg Hoffman, former CMO of Nike and co-creator of Beyond Your Limits, where Greg is taking all of his professional tenure and expertise and bringing it out to this ever-changing athlete market. It's not my story to tell, and we're excited to hop into this one. Greg, my man, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, Scott, it's an honor to be here, and thanks for the invitation. Really looking forward to the conversation. And yeah, I mean, it's beautiful out here because it's actually not raining in the Pacific Northwest. So feeling good.
I was going to say that is an anomaly, and we're going to have to take advantage of that. Listen, Greg, I think it's so exciting, and we're going to be able to take this conversation in a myriad of ways. But, unless you're living under a rock, over the last 5 years, we've watched the athlete and their journey evolve quicker than ever before. And, before we get into all the amazing work you're doing to help amplify that, I think it's important to understand your origin story. So, Greg, give the listeners a little context on the build up to what you're working on now.
Yeah, well, just a quick story. 27 years at Nike, so almost 3 decades. Started right out of college, literally. Drove my parents' van across the country and showed up in Nike's parking lot, essentially, and waited for my internship to start. I was a graphic design intern, and I think it might be relevant to this story. My first project was working on the Deion Sanders ad, or his brand, if you will. One of the pioneers of personal branding for athletes, Coach Sanders. You could say he's even more well-known today than he was at his peak as an athlete. From there, I worked in innovation, design, advertising, and marketing divisions over those 3 decades, and ultimately became chief marketing officer for a time. And along the way, had the opportunity to work with absolutely remarkable athletes, teams, and coaches, and learned a lot along the way. And so when I retired in 2020, that was really that first mountain to climb, was really about, building a career and making waves through a brand and through the privilege of leading these teams. And then, the second mountain upon leaving Nike, I was able to bring all those lessons together and write a book called Emotion by Design, Creative Leadership Lessons from a Life at Nike, which has taken me around the world as a keynote speaker, 15 different languages in terms of editions. And at the same time, Scott, a couple other things started to come to life. I became the branding and marketing instructor at the University of Oregon's Graduate School of Business, but with a specific focus on students that want to become the next GMs at the Nikes, at the Under Armours, Reeboks, etc. So it's the sports product management program at the U of O's graduate school. So they were kind enough to allow me to create 2 different curriculums, one for marketing and one for branding. And then the last thing I would say is I advise and consult with both Fortune 500 brands, but also a lot of startup brands. And some of those startups are, again, in the sports product space. And it's just a remarkable time that you and I could have a conversation today about a product idea, and we could literally start shipping and monetizing that within months. So certainly special times.
No, it's so neat. And, I think, Greg, like as you built this legacy at Nike, so much of what I'm hearing is through this education lens, right? How do I take what I'm learning and now start to democratize this access and send it downstream, which I think is a big sort of nod of the cap to what you're working on there. I'm curious, when we talk about the foundation of all of this, through, understanding who you are, creativity seems to be one of the themes that we see throughout. And so I want to just sort of jump right into it, right? We talk so much about this idea, is creativity learned, or is this something that we're born with? And I want to use this as a foundation as we start to unpack the athlete's journey and really building a brand. But I think this is sort of the threshold. So let's sort of start there and then.
Sure. Well, certainly the old definition was you were born either creative or not, right? We had this, very antiquated idea that if you could draw, you were creative, and if you couldn't, you are not creative. And
Yeah.
so we need to completely retire that. My definition of creativity is it's the act of conceiving ideas and applying ideas. And all of us, I don't care who you are, we can all brainstorm, imagine, and define in our mind different ideas and futures that don't exist. So creativity is for all of us. Application used to be just reserved for the people that went to school, that had a lot of experience, that mastered that craft over 10,000 hours, graphic designer, copywriter, architect, etc. But of course, the democratization of creative tools now allows all of us to express our creativity, whether it's for professional endeavors or just personal, like never before. So I think, yes, today it's not just for a chosen few. All of us are indeed creative on different levels. And now, look, we essentially have, with the smartphone and AI, we essentially have a creative agency in the palm of our hand,
Yep.
right? And that is both gratifying, but it's also intimidating. There's a lot of advantages of that, but there are some pitfalls as well. Certainly, when you're trying to create the brand of you in the most authentic way, we need to make sure you're using all these gifts, if you will, both the ones that are within you, but also the ones that are supercharged by technology. We need to make sure we're building towards something that represents a future that you believe in.
Yeah. And, I think what's interesting is, Greg, as we've gone through this journey, I found that a lot of folks have bought vanity, instead of buying necessity. And I think one thing that, as I've, learned the body of work that you've done is you've been able to build depth to the brands and depth to the messaging. And in a world right now where everyone has access to these tools, it feels like the messaging may be a little more shallow. Talk to us a little bit about how do you start, to build a foundation, and we can narrow in on the athlete
Sure.
that is rooted in depth and substance, and then starts to organically attract the eyeballs with the right invitations to the market.
Yeah, great question, Scott, and an absolute necessity, and where one should begin, right? I call it building your brand arena, right? Or you could even call it building your brand bank, if you will, because every action, everything you do out there, you want to make sure is either a deposit into your brand bank or unfortunately if it's a withdrawal, you don't want to get to a point where over time you go to your bank of brand equity and all of a sudden there's just nothing there, right?
Mm.
So building your brand house or your foundation so that your brand sits on solid ground is, it's about defining your purpose, your mission and vision, your values, and your brand persona, and really articulating those out loud and literally, figuratively speaking, on paper so that you have a guide or a lighthouse that's guiding you, not just on the things you say yes to, but more importantly, in my career, working with athletes and launching innovation, etc. It's oftentimes the guide to what you say no to that's almost more important. And by the way, I mean, you have a mural of Kobe Bryant behind you. No one was better at articulating and defining their brand house than Kobe. Like he fully fleshed out what the Black Mamba mentality was. He wasn't just doing things and hoping by chance that they might be successful, right? Because at the end of the day, he understood that why would you spend thousands of hours making sure that your performance on the field or court or pitch wasn't left to chance through practice? So why leave it to chance of your brand being successful or not? So that's putting in the reps and really defining internally. Quite frankly, the people don't get to see this part, right? These are the strategic thinking and planning that you're going to do internally so that what you create externally shines brighter. And that's what
Mm.
I say. The less time you spend internally on those different dimensions, the dimmer, quite frankly, or the more of an imitation of what you put out there in terms of representing your brand.
Mm. I mean, so many nuggets in there. And I think it all starts with you sitting with yourself and really understanding what you want that to be. And in a world where we're pulled in distractions, I think that's sometimes challenging to truly understand what you're looking to get from the journey and how you want to portray yourself externally. Greg, before we start to take the dive into what you're building now, I just want to like paint the picture for the listeners. When we talk about some of the greatest athletes that have built the brands under the Nike umbrella, what does the resource catalog look like? Is it a one person team that's working with them? Do they have a whole team that is behind them, helping them develop this? Because when we talk around democratizing, it's how do we take the resources and education and make sure they show up to the athlete at the right time. So I think it's important to understand what it's like at the top, and then how do we start to go ahead and take those same ingredients and bring it downstream.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're going through a transformation, of course, but the old model, of course, was there was a select few athletes that had access to enormous resources and talent within the brands that they were endorsed by, or they are endorsing those brands. And so you had have access to marketers, designers, advertising. Not only that, but their solar system of agencies. So there's this incredible support system behind a lot of those marquee athletes. Then over time, what you started to see is athletes at that elite level started to realize, like, you know what? I can be CEO of my own brand. I look at someone like a Kevin Durant who started to realize that I'm going to create an entire world, an ecosystem of touch points that I can engage with my audience that's multidimensional. And within that, I'm going to start to build up my own resources of creative partners, of strategic partners, right? And what I would say here is that, and we'll probably get into this a little more, is what all these athletes understood in terms of building their personal brands is that emotion is what separates the average ones from the most successful ones,
Mm,
because the athletes and brands that are able to stir emotions are the ones that occupy that rarefied place in an
absolutely.
audience's mind, where it's not, it goes beyond the rational, right? And it's how you make people feel, not just about you, the athlete, but how they feel about themselves and their ability to achieve great things. And so when you think of Serena, LeBron, Kobe, just think about this for a minute. Again, it's not just what people felt about them, the athlete, and the reverence they had, but it's how those athletes made them feel about themselves and their ability to take on the world. Those That's a transcendent brand. And so there's brands that never, go beyond just transactional utility. Like you and I could just replace that tomorrow.
Sure.
But the brands that are irreplaceable, they understand that emotion is the underpinning of the relationship with your audience on that. So, long story short, where we are today now is you don't have to be so reliant on those other resources that live within these potential brands that you might partner with, because you have such a resources at your disposal, right? If you need to build your own athlete brand website, there are templates and tools available right now that you can launch that today. 10 years ago, man, if you didn't have the time or resources, no website, no way for people to get your merch, no way for people to see you unpack your skills and moves and stuff. And so when you start to couple these things along with YouTube and some other channels, it's just a remarkable time.
And I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, where we have all of this at the convenience in our pocket, right? We can do so much right here through the advancement of technology, which is really exciting and a nice segue into what you're building now, right? And so, we always talk about how do you take, 30 years of expertise and watching the market evolve and create a scalable solution to be able to go ahead and deliver this back to athletes earlier in their journey to be able to lay that, proper foundation that they can build the house on top of. So let's talk a little bit about Beyond Your Limits. You've come in for the listeners, give them an overview of, what this body of work has been, and then we'll unpack it, with where the market's at as we continue to go.
Sure. So Beyond Your Limits, is a methodology of building a brand for the long term, not just the moment, but building a brand for the long term. So 10, 15, 20 years from now, you can look back on what you've built and see the legacy long after, because there's limits to how long you can play the game, but certainly it's limitless in terms of the potential of building your brand. And so at the center of Beyond Your Limits is a 7-episode video series, right? Where I take athletes step by step through a process that, we repeated to incredible success with athletes, with teams, with products, and the overall brand, and always remained in part of the contemporary conversation, right? Because this is about mastering the fundamentals of brand building and kind of demystifying it, if you will. So back to, building your brand house, building a distinctive brand positioning. What is it about you within this unbelievably noisy, crowded space that's truly going to stand out amongst that? We talk you through how to really articulate your brand personality, which is a mosaic of characteristics and traits. At Nike, we always wanted to show up as a brand like a living, breathing athlete. One of the things we knew is we had to show the edges of our personality and our brand within the way we had conversations with our audience. Because if we showed up the same way each time you engaged with us with the same tone, same attitude, it's probably going to be pretty boring and annoying. So we really talk about, again, before you press play on delivering the content, let's make sure we understand, what makes you you, because the biggest maybe takeaway for the audience here is that within this program, we teach you how to make sure that perception matches reality. Who you believe yourself to be at your core is also how you're perceived by your audience, by prospective brands, by fellow athletes, right? Because oftentimes when you see content missing or when you see a brand kind of start to disappear, if you will, it's when that distance between perception and reality starts to get really wide. So we have a whole section called Close the Distance, right?
Ooh.
To make sure at the end of the day, a brand's value is determined by the collective perception of your audience. So let's make sure we don't leave that to chance, right? Let's close that distance on that. And so then we do get into and start to bring the audience through different frameworks under the mantra, dare to be remembered. Like, let's make sure we're telling stories that will never be forgotten versus we're just adding to the disposable, market of inputs, overstimulation that people have. Let's make sure because Scott, we're under pressure so often to deliver more faster.
Mm-hmm.
But let's make sure what we're doing is better. And when I say better, that we're telling stories that are inspiring, that are educational, but more importantly, are empowering to our audience. And so we talk through those different frameworks. And the great thing about this program is we have lots of different case studies that we bring to life to illustrate that, right? So, but at the end of the day, the products that are of most value in one's life that are irreplaceable, it's not by chance, it's by design. And I feel the same way about designing athlete brands in the most authentic way possible. And of course, the last couple episodes of the course, we start to get into world building, start to think bigger in terms of all the different ways you can bring to life your brand for your audience, and also really going deep on who that audience is. And and then finally getting into some of the different advantages of the platforms and channels that we boundless opportunities that we have at our fingertips. And quite frankly, a lot of free media, because
Yeah.
that was the other thing in the past. You were blocked out if you didn't have access to these platforms, to TV, and other mediums, then you were just on the sideline. And so we all have an opportunity now to get our voice heard. So let's make sure it's a voice that's worth listening to and will make a difference.
I couldn't agree more with the way you laid that out. And the unique thing in building in the athletic arena is it's a global universal language. And so you're not confined to just your geographic presence. With the tools that we have and the expansion of the asset class, the athlete voice and platform and foundation is heard around the world. And we've seen that, countless times over and over again. Greg, I have a question for you. We talk so much about laying the foundation, but there's a continuum within a brand, right? As the athlete continues to evolve through their journey, the messaging may evolve. So is this something that you would recommend, you only do at the beginning of your journey and you lay the foundation, or what does the maintenance look like as you continue to grow as an athlete? And how do you grow in parallel with your brand?
You owe it to yourself each year, each quarter, each month to really reevaluate, and if needed, refine kind of those core values and principles that you believe in, and the things that have allowed you to create success on the field, and how those translate into the other ways you want to make an impact. So one of the things we talked about a lot, and I'll just do it,
Yeah.
right? So the average lifespan of a corporate slogan is a year to 18 months. Then it's retired. Well, why? Because they're not investing in it. They're not investing in the message with depth. It's just words, right? And they're not revisiting how they express it in a contemporary way to the next generation of consumers. And so why has Just Do It been around since 19? I mean, isn't that impossible?
Yeah.
But the lesson to learn there for athletes in terms of their brands is to understand that we believed it was about progression and transformation. Like if you think of any Olympian, they're on a journey of progression, right? Trying to incrementally get better every day, and then transformative moments, right? At those big events. And then they're back to progressing again. What could be more fun than constantly progressing as a brand, whether it's a company or an individual or an athlete? And so that's what I would say is, think of this as this incredible ramp of progression and these continuous moments of transformation. And you never stop. That was the thing about Michael Jordan and Kobe and all these incredible athletes, is there was always better, right? There was always another mountain to climb, and it was always about progress. And I think they recognized that in their audience, that the audience too is on their own journey of progression and transformation. And how are you, the athlete, going to motivate them to continue to level up? And so use that as a mirror when we talk about revisiting your brand arena or house, your distinct points of difference from all the other athletes out there, and then the ways you want to exercise your voice on that. And I think, and then the last thing I would say there is one of my favorite quotes by the late great fashion designer Alexander McQueen, who was an unbelievable innovator. But one of the things he said was, you got to know the rules before you break them, right? And so what we're trying to do here with Beyond Your Limits is master the fundamentals so that you can leverage being more spontaneous, being improvisational in moments, because you've got such a strong understanding of the fundamentals of brand building.
Yeah. And it's an investment, right? And at the end of the day, like you have to go ahead and lean into this. And I'm curious, Greg, as you roll this out, the athletes are getting inundated with so many different voices of influence. And I think, you're sending such a signal coming from one of the most premier brands within the sporting world, and now starting to democratize access. As you guys continue to roll this out, do you see this being an investment from the athlete, from the institutions, from the larger governing bodies? In a perfect world, how do you see the sporting market adopting this incredible course and resource that you're putting out there to make sure that athletes have a uniform foundation that they're being educated on so they know those rules and where to potentially break them?
Yeah, I think it's both. Both, and I say this from a brand and business standpoint. So when we think of the athlete as a client, providing access to athletes individually to participate in this program, and I look at it as a program, but it's in some ways it's also a brand as well, a brand of human potential, if you will. At the same time, for team ownership or conferences or universities or even actual professional organizations, I think we're in a moment in time, it's in their best interest. And I think you're seeing this in the WNBA, where team leadership, like the business leadership, is saying it's in our best interest to create the flexibility and freedom within some guidelines for our athletes that represent our brand to also create their personal brands. It's
Yeah.
good for our brand, but it's also good for business. So I do look at the organizations as clients as well. And I think the ones who are understanding that now isn't the time to restrict the ability for athletes to build and monetize their brand. Now's the time, if anything, is to empower or educate them how they can build it for the long term, how it can reflect well on the organization as a whole. One of the things I always live by, and I started to have to lead and manage really big teams really early in my career. Was dropped into the deep end of the pool, if you will, on that. But you're really trying to create an environment that prioritizes enterprise over ego, right? But I believe you can achieve that. And I always use the incredible team of the 2000s, the FC Barcelona teams, coached by Pep Guardiola, the Spanish football clubs.
Yep.
He was so good at creating that mindset of enterprise over ego, yet you could still distinctly look at the different individuals on that. Obviously, Messi and others had like these unbelievable personalities, right?
Sure.
So you can achieve both. And that's my point to business leaders that are running the leagues and the teams, is that you can still achieve a powerful and consistent brand image while also empowering the individual personas of your teams and allowing them to access revenue from other sources beyond just what they're doing on the court or the pitch.
And I think finding that harmony between those two, and when done correctly and led, like you said, it elevates the entirety of the brand, right? We say like all tides rise the boats in the harbor, right? And so before it was the rock and jock model, and now it's, how do we help build our athletes and ultimately become good stewards of the brand, and find that harmony? I think that's so well said. And Greg, it's an exciting time within the sporting landscape as we watch the infrastructure change and evolve. We're watching new leagues start to come and pop up, right? In sports, track and field and LOVB in the volleyball space. And so now we're watching leagues have to adopt the same principles and foundation as the athletes. And they're reliant on the athletes to be, the billboards and the posters to continue to drive that commercial viability. So it's a really exciting time, and I'm sure that you'll nod your head to this, but timing's everything in this game, right? And so it feels like with the evolution of the asset class, the maturation of the athlete, and then this sort of lack in education and uniform on how do we, like, what's the playbook to go do this? It feels like that you guys have hit the absolute bullseye. Greg, as we start to turn the corner and bring this thing home, I got a couple rapid fire questions, but if folks want to learn more about what you're doing at Beyond Your Limits, what's the best way to go ahead and learn more and get exposed to the program you guys have built?
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, the site is up and running, and you can learn a lot about what the offering is there. We also have an Instagram that is every day sharing different tips and inspiration around that. Also, I spend my life today professionally speaking on these concepts. So you can follow me on Instagram at GHOFF70, off 70 on that. And I want to say this too with this program and Beyond Your Limits, what we're building. At the end of the day, speed and agility are still the dominant traits, both, on the field of play, if you will, but also in terms of this incredibly fast paced world we're living in. And so we're teaching a lot of these concepts and delivering these frameworks and skills, but they're still applicable and you're still able to accomplish the things at the speed of culture today, right? Because I've always said, if you're not there when your audience needs you most, then they're just going to go and engage with someone else, right?
Mm,
So I wanted to make that distinction that we fully recognize in terms of the brand we're building with Beyond Your Limits, that this is about, moving at incredible accelerated speed. And we have the tools and platforms now to run that fast. But let's just make sure we're not, again, just putting stuff out there that is either not making a difference or worse, is eroding our brand, right? Let's make sure we start with a place of strength and then just continually build that equity over the time. Scott, I'm wearing the Nike Air Force One sneakers right now. And this is a perfect example for athletes to use this as a symbol of how you build brand equity, because this particular product, the Nike Air Force One, was designed in 1982.
hmm,
Okay. It's 2025 now, and it's the highest selling by revenue sneaker franchise in the world, but it looks the exact same. So,
hmm,
how do you even achieve that? It's not by chance, right? It's about investing in the story of that product, that person, that brand. It's about building the world around it. It's about showing up in the right places with the right people. That again is constantly putting equity in the bank over and over again. So you too, like the Air Force One, 30 years from now, are looking back and going, wow, it's incredible what we've built. And it wasn't here just with arbitrary decisions. It wasn't by chance. We designed it this way. So that's what we want to do.
And Greg, I'd be remiss if I don't share this story because it really exemplifies everything we talked about today. And it's about the brand and the slogan transcending far beyond what you do as the athlete or the brand. Before the show, I was sharing that my wife and I went on a 30,000-mile road trip across North America, had the opportunity to learn from some of the greatest. And, Greg, we were right on the fence about doing this trip, and I got a piece of advice, and I'll never forget it. Gentleman who I wasn't even really close with, he said, just go buy a pair of Nikes and read the box. And I said, just do it. And that slogan changed the course of my life. And so it is incredible when you build something that has such depth and meaning. And obviously it resonated to me as an athlete. It were three simple words that out of context mean really anything, but in context of the brand propelled me to do something that was bigger than myself. And it changed the whole course of my life. And so I wanted to share that because I think,
Yeah.
without stories, these are all just empty words, and brands are just the platform for you to be able to tell stories. And in a world that's getting increasingly more technologically savvy, the thing that keeps us human is the ability to tell stories and the ability to exercise our creativity and learn from great folks like Greg Hoffman. And so, Greg, I can't thank you enough for the work you've done for the industry, for sending the ladder back down to start to elevate everybody that is in this athletic journey. And I'm going to let you take us home if you have any words of wisdom or parting words for us.
Well, I would say this, and thank you, Scott, for sharing that story. It's so well said, and there's a lot of inspiration to take from that. And in this moment in time where technology really has leveled the playing field, where some of the most mediocre brands are now able to rise to the level of some of the most successful brands. So the one thing that's going to set you apart is human ingenuity and creativity. Creativity isn't a luxury. It's not just for a chosen few, right? We all got it within us. And so let's unlock that and not just show up at different moments, but truly create a movement, right? Create a movement of human potential for your audience, right? Where they feel like they're building something with you. And part of some audacious vision of the future, some destination out there that's just amazing. Be the leader of that and pull people to that, and your brand will build from that.
Ooh, drop the mic. Greg, thank you again. A lot more to come, first of many. Be sure to check out Beyond Your Limits and the amazing thing that work this group is pushing out. And we will come back to you from our next episode. Hope everyone has a great one. Talk soon.